thank you so much for being here today. It is truly a pleasure to welcome you to this academic year's TESS Executive Speaker Series. As I was thinking about today's topic, I was thinking about how every generation has some major technological advancement that leads to some kind of disruption. So we go back a little ways. We've got electricity, we've got telephones, we've got cars, we've got the computer, televisions. But you know what? For all of us in this room, it's not just one technological disruption per generation. We have all lived through many of them. So think about the internet, social media, smartphones, and of course the most recent one and the one that may have the biggest impact on all of us, AI. The thing about technological advancements and the disruptions that they bring with them is that they present a lot of challenges for organizations, but they also present opportunities for those organizations that are able to adapt to them and to respond effectively. They're a chance to rethink your product and services. They're a chance to maybe change the way you lead your organization. They're a chance for you to reposition your organization in the marketplace. And that's why I'm super excited about the conversation that we're going to have today, because I think there's probably no industry that has been as affected by technological disruption as the industry of news media. So that's kind of our case study for today and what we're going to focus on, but I feel very confident that you're going to walk out of here with some insights that are relevant for any leader in any organization in any industry. So before I invite Grant to the stage, see, I'm giving you a warning. I'm telling you, don't come up just yet.
It was Tiara. I didn't know, Tiara.
So don't give Tiara a hard time. So before I invite Grant up to the stage, I want to tell you a little bit about him. So for the past 16 years, Grant has had some kind of leadership capacity at Dallas Morning News, most recently as president and publisher. He is also CEO of DallasNews Corporation. Grant received his bachelor's in journalism from the University of Kansas, but he very quickly realized that his life would be incomplete without a degree from TCU. And so he earned a MBA from Neely in 2004. Since then, I am very pleased to say that he has been a very active and valued member of the Neely Board of Advisors. And he also is a frequent attendee of these TESS breakfasts. So he knows what he is getting into today. So with that, I will welcome Grant to the stage. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So before we get started with the questions, of course, the first thing I have to do is thank our sponsors for this event today. So we are especially grateful for our longtime platinum sponsor, Frostbank. Thank you, Hadley. We also have a gold sponsor, Fort Worth Business Press. Silver sponsors, Balcom Agency, Lindbeck. And bronze sponsors, Acme Brick, BNSF Railway, Dunaway, Esri, McDonald Sanders, and Perkins and Will. And so I will just give you a kind of a heads up of how this questioning is going to go. So I have some questions that I'm going to ask Grant, but we're going to save some time at the end for some questions from the audience. So if you look out on your tables, you should see some little Neely note cards and some pens. So as the conversation is going on today, if you think of questions, definitely write them down, and then a little bit later we will send people around to pick those questions up, and we will answer some of those from the stage. Okay, so before I go full Barbara Walters on you, we'll start with an easy question. Why did you choose the TCU Neely School of Business to get your MBA?
Well, yeah, let's start with the horned frog question right off the bat.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it. So it's interesting. My wife, Katie, who's with me, I think we were kind of one of these unique couples that, in 2002, decided both of us go back and get our MBA. She went to SMU, I went to TCU. And there was a piece of this fascinating experience we had that ultimately, I will just tell you who won. We ended up moving from Dallas to Fort Worth. There was far more kind of purple pride going on in our house at the time and still today. But really TCU stood out to me for a couple of reasons. When you're a journalism undergraduate major, and especially 20 plus years ago, I'd never taken an economics course. I'd never taken finance. I'd never taken accounting. And so for me, I needed someplace that was small enough to really learn business. Because I knew journalism. Coming out at Kansas, it's a great journalism school, but it was like how to run a business, which was always my dream. Neely was so good for me because the class size was small enough where the amount of personal attention I got was so fantastic, and I'm still, close with some of those professors today, 20 years later. So it was like a big family then, and it still feels that way today.
That's a great answer, and I just have to ask, we talked a little bit beforehand, but does your wife regret going to SMU?
I'll let her answer. Later, off the record.
Okay, so that was a good answer of why TCU, but would you mind sharing an overview of your professional journey and how it led to your current role as CEO of a highly regarded, award-winning national news media organization?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I was one of these rare 14-year-olds who actually knew what he wanted to do for a living. My parents would joke, I would come home from school at middle school and I'd be watching Walter Cronkite, Tom Brokaw, I'd be watching Peter Jennings, and they were like, what is he, like, what? Most kids are watching after-school specials, Saved by the Bell, and I'm in there watching the news. So I guess I just knew what I really wanted to do back then, and it was great because I literally, from the time I could drive and get a driver's license, my parents had a triangle, and I couldn't go out of the triangle. It was from home to school to the TV station. And so that, we got a driver's license at New Mexico at the time at 15. So I was going to the TV station pretty much 3 days a week at least. It was my happy place. And, when you fast forward, I came to Neely because I then realized I thought I wanted to be on air for a while until I realized a lifestyle of a TV anchor or reporter is really, really difficult, a lot of moving. And then I changed my major from broadcast to advertising in undergrad. And what it ultimately led to coming to Neely was just this thought of I needed to get more well-rounded from a business standpoint, which has just led to fascinating roles in the company. But I think ultimately what positioned me to lead the company is I ran our mergers and acquisitions business about 10 years ago. And so that's when we had to strategically look at the company and say, okay, what of our assets were we selling at the time? Mm-hmm. And then I was on the buy side. So I had to strategically, and we built an advertising agency called Medium Giant. We have about 160 employees. And so I basically helped build and assemble the agency when we knew that print advertising was on not a cyclical decline, but we knew this was secular. We knew where print was going. We got out ahead of it. We built an agency. There's a social media part of the agency, search engine marketing, all the things that we'll talk about today. We do that for marketers, on one side of the business. And then ultimately, when I was looking at the business strategically from that vantage point, it really led to, okay, this path of ultimately becoming CEO, which is just a complete honor for me, and I love it. But I think it was 10 years ago when I got to start looking at really what I call the chess pieces on the board of a business rather than the day-to-day. It was like, okay, wait, not just what are we doing next quarter, but 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do we need to be able to really have the kind of journalism we want to have? So it's all worked out.
It's a great answer. It really illustrates how right, what I mentioned at the beginning of my intro, right? Those companies, those organizations that are able to see this change is coming and to get out ahead of it are going to have a very different outcome from those that don't.
Yeah.
So you alluded to the fact that you're now CEO, but you're a man of many hats. So you're CEO of Dallas News Corporation, you're president and publisher of Dallas Morning News. How do those roles differ?
Yeah, so for many of you in the room who've been in North Texas, Dallas-Fort Worth for a long time, Dallas News Corporation is the new name for what was BLO at the time. So many people remember BLO. And so in my role as CEO of the public company, I've got an earnings call 24 hours from right now. So it's a lot about investors, the capital allocation. We've got the financial piece of things like our pension. I'm really thinking about the big financial pieces of the puzzle in that CEO role. Are we doing the right thing for shareholders versus doing the right thing in a business, which we'll talk about for quite a bit of time, that's going through this digital transformation, but at the same time, shareholders are investing in us for a reason. They want a return. That's that CEO hat, is just thinking about, okay, are we doing what's right in our fiduciary responsibility? But then as publisher of the morning news, I kind of call it a role where we've got a 600-person company. And out of those 600, about 350 of them are dedicated to journalism. Mm-hmm. And so at the Dallas Morning News, there's just this piece of saying, okay, are we doing it right? Are we practicing journalism responsibly? Have to have a finger on the pulse of the community. I sit on many civic boards to understand now not only what's happening, but why. Because we also, not only in the Dallas Morning News, have the news side, but then also we have our opinion side, our editorial pages. Well, if you're going to weigh in with an opinion on a daily basis, and the publisher doesn't understand what's happening in your city or your region, people discount the opinion of the newspaper. And so I'd say it's kind of that finger on the pulse job is the publisher job. The CEO job is about the fiduciary responsibility, the shareholder interests, and just the whole financial puzzle, as I call it.
Okay, interesting. So kind of building off of that, the evolution of media has seen some incredible changes in the past decade, and it's accelerating all the time. How would you describe the technology disruptions media markets are currently experiencing, and what's the impact on the business of the Dallas News Corporation?
Yeah, it's digital disruption, right? You can probably think, if you're in the banking business, who would have thought you'd sit in there and say, oh, we're not a banking company, we're a technology company, right? And then you're getting a higher valuation because you're a technology company, like companies like Chime, as opposed to a standard bank. And you're like, well, hang on, we're doing the same purpose, right? Mm-hmm. In the media business, it's fascinating. A lot of people, some people will say, oh, you're in the newspaper business. Oh, I remember when it must have been so big. And I'm just like, oh, geez. I was like, that's, it's like, who wants to run a company that's saying, boy, it must have used to have just been great. But here's the irony about the digital disruption. The Dallas Morning News has been here for almost 140 years. The audiences have never been bigger than they've been in the last 5. So think about that. We have 7 million people a month who read our content today. And in the heyday of when the Dallas Morning News was, as people like to say, printing money, it was less than 700,000 people reading our content. Wow. Right? So this is this digital paradox almost that we're facing, right? So you have 7 million today, and at the peak of the financial performance was 700,000, but it shows you that's the power of the internet. Mm-hmm. And it's the power in all of our businesses of supply and demand, because in advertising before the internet, it was a lot less supply. There were fewer places to advertise. Mm-hmm. Well, now that you've got millions and millions, and you mentioned the smartphone in the opening, the internet had done one thing, but then when we have these computers in our pockets and on our body every day, we're going, and just the amount, what's happened to the advertising business specifically has just been amazing. But you hit on those things too that we'll talk about here over the next 30 minutes. Not only internet, not only smartphones, what's happened with search, right? So Google is a verb, right? You Googled it. It's like when Kleenex became, it's like, Kleenex is a brand, but all of a sudden everybody thinks, oh no, just get some Kleenex, even though it may not be Kleenex brand. You're watching things change, in this world to where social media, impact, and then to your point, this most recent of generative AI will be a game changer, and I think we're just starting in our business to understand what that is, and we're studying the heck out of it.
I love the juxtaposition you gave of, right, where Dallas News is right now relative to where it was, and this, I think it's a natural kind of with human beings is to react a little against change, and if something is different, then maybe that's not good, but it's a matter of reframing it and thinking about it in different ways, and even redefining what success looks like. It's hard to argue with, what did you say, 7
million
7 million.
and 700,000.
7
So
million.
let me tell you a
Good.
fun story of this. I was at the CEO Confidential that the Neely School does with this great class of MBA students about a month ago. And one of the students asked, we've been studying disruption, and aren't you kind of like Kodak? and but it's a smart question, right? Because they said, well, look, film, when digital cameras came out, it rendered film obsolete. There's no question about it. And that was that 7 million versus 700,000, though, which is so fascinating, is if our product was a printed newspaper, well then, yes, what's happened digitally is putting the printed newspaper on a path where it will one day just be gone. But when the journalism is the product, and when the content is the product, that's where you're saying, okay, but wait, now that it's reaching 7 million people, as long as that demand is there, and that's the strange, dichotomy of this is more people want the content, yet paying for it has never been harder. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting business challenge.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, we could talk about that for a lot,
yeah.
But I will not take us off. I will not take us off task. So when you talk about the evolution of anything, it's both extensive and it's of course nuanced too at the same time. So to help our audience digest this information, can you summarize your description of media market technology disruptions in three short sentences?
Yeah.
Just to make sure you're appropriately challenged this morning.
I'd summarize disruption first as we've been disintermediated. So people have gotten between us and our customer. It might be Google, might be Facebook, maybe Twitter or X, whatever we want to call it today. So that's difficult. The second piece of it is consumption pattern. The average person reading a newspaper spends 29 minutes. The average person reading our content digitally is 80 seconds.
Wow.
So 29 minutes, and we can go into that next. So you've got disintermediation, you've got this consumer pattern, but then you've got this piece where when people get in between you, then you're also struggling with trust. What does your brand mean? And how is your brand relevant on a social media platform versus people consuming your brand directly in a printed format, or just that experience with the brand. So I'd say it's kind of those three legs of the stool is how I would frame the disruption.
Okay.
Maybe 3 topics, not 3 sentences.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you did well.
Okay.
I'm impressed. So speaking more specifically to generative artificial intelligence, the impact is, of course, touching every industry. It's touching us here at Neely. We're trying to really reach out and get ahead of that and actively incorporate it into our classes so that it's not this thing that we're pushing off to the side, but teaching students how to actually use it as a tool to make things better. But in your role as a CEO, what influence has AI had on the news media organizations overall, and specifically at the Dallas Morning News?
So how many people here have played with ChatGPT, just by show of hands? I mean, almost the whole
Pretty
room,
much everyone,
right?
yeah.
I mean, so that's interesting. How many people had heard of ChatGPT 5 years ago? I mean, so that's how fast it's changing. For those of you who are looking up here and not out there, I'd say 90% of the room has tested it. 0% of this room knew what that even was, what the company was back 5 years ago. So that just shows the speed of change, is just amazing. But so there's 2 parts of it. One is the protection. So let's just take journalism aside for a minute and talk about what people don't understand about this new platform. We've had to put a lot of rules and policies in place as a public company to tell people in our finance and accounting, and especially our corporate finance department, do not put your financial information into this public arena of kind of how, generative AI, kind of some of these generative AI sandboxes is what I call them. ChatGPT is just one of them, but there's many. Because otherwise, you've disclosed your information. It's become public. You didn't know that. You thought, oh, I was just putting it in here to organize it. Well, so you've got some of the protection of information. But then the number one for us is just the way people are getting their news. 1 out of every 3 people that come to DallasNews.com, so out of those 7 million people, about 2.3 million of them every month come from search, come from Google. Well, what's happening with generative AI, and if any of you are in the beta test of not only ChatGPT with Bing search, but also Google has a beta right now called Bard, and you do not leave the search page. Right now, they get 2 sentences, but then they have to click through to our website. Well, it's a lot of money for us. That's a lot of ad revenue. It's a lot of our leads to become a digital subscriber. And so what we're really trying to find out right now, and many of us in the media business, we're actually now blocking the AI from being able to scrape our content, because that's our intellectual property. I mean, our content is our intellectual property. And so it's going to be interesting, Hetty, to see how this pans out, because I don't know a single media company who has not blocked them right now.
Right, yeah.
But then you start to be worried, well, oh no, but what if they do end up clicking through and I've just given up all these new leads that can make up 1/3 of our audience? So but we're so early innings, we almost don't know what the upside and downside could really be.
It makes me think also too, just in terms of if AI is learning from what it is able to have access to, and it can't have access to these major news media organizations, what is it really learning too, right? Is it at a stagnant?
Yeah, because the way that ChatGPT, those of you who've studied it, the full library that they have is cut off at the end of 2021. But now they're still collecting today, and so we're stopping them from the collection. So if you had asked me 6 months ago when I was sitting here, I'd say, we're in good shape, because it ended at 2021. Yeah. So if news breaks today, it's original. They're going to have to come to us, because it's not going to be in the ChatGPT search box on Bing, or it's not going to be in Google and come through to us. But the reality of it is they're crawling us every day until we blocked them. And so then you're saying, okay, well, we thought we were safe, but then we realized maybe we're not. And so we kept thinking, because the daily news cycle is so fast, that maybe we're going to be less affected, but we still just don't know. Yeah. I mean, I could come back a year from now and may say it ended up being a good thing for us. Or I might come back a year from now and saying, oh my gosh, it has been the biggest blow to the company that we've seen. We don't know yet.
Yeah. Well, we may have to have you back in a year for you to tell us how that turned out. Okay, you kind of hit on the search engine side of things. So, right, we all use search engines at some point in time, and as you said, Google has even become a verb. With focus frequently on trending interests instead of trusted, accurate sources, what is the business impact that you are seeing? And in what ways do you expect other businesses and corporations to be similarly impacted?
We're all looking for instant gratification, right? That's the ease of Google. Is Google, what happened today? Google, what's the latest, or Siri, or, you can voice it now, right? And get the answer of what happened over the past 24 hours in the Israel-Hamas war. What happened in our umpteenth time we've tried to, get a Speaker of the House. I mean, all these things, right? But when you're asking, people don't know the source. And many times, even on the verbal, right, when Google or Siri tells you, oh, here's the answer, it didn't say NBC News said blank, or the Wall Street Journal said blank. It just gives you the answer. Well, the challenge of search, not only of what's trending, but also the convenience of what people are looking for, what worries me the most is people have lost a sense of, well, then, but what's the source of that information? And if you are in a media organization, the amount of time that we spend scrutinizing whether the facts are accurate, whether the sources are trustworthy, and if we got to have all of our, all those boxes have to be checked before we press publish. But then there's also PR firms who may be just out there trying to say, I'm trying to push one angle of one topic and one issue. Yeah. Well, if they get a lot of traction in search and somebody's getting an answer from something from a public relations firm who had an angle of something for the profitability of their client that they're trying to advance versus someone who has journalism trying to do it responsibly, but you don't know what the source was of your information, the world becomes a scary place. It really does. And that's what search engines have done for us is we want news and information quickly, and it's kind of like, oh, well, I didn't know if it was accurate. But then we all start talking about it as if we know it's true. But if you don't know what the source of the information is, how do you know it's true? And Hetty, it's a scary time. But I just hope people will get back to saying, okay, but what was the source of that information? And so can I trust that source? I think that's going to be really important in an age of search taking over our convenient lives.
And do you think that has, are there implications in other industries as well besides news media?
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I think what's interesting too in search is, those of us who, everybody in here's lived on Google, right? It used to be easier for us to know because it was a shaded box at the top. If you're running a company and you said, I'm in the business of selling TCU tumblers, well, if you knew how people searched, you could just go buy those keywords. We as consumers knew everything that was shaded at the top of Google. We knew it was paid. But then we knew once you got out of the shade, it was really who had the most organic traffic, who had the best, most reputable business. The ratings were positive. They knew that the consumer reviews were strong. They knew they were selling a lot of products. We all learned over time, right? Don't go to the paid listings. Go to that top of the organic listings. Well, then the shading got lighter. And then they started moving the boxes on Google to confuse us to understand, wait, is that paid? Or are they paying for that placement? And, Google's printing money, right? They are just so they are keeping us guessing. And so for all of you as marketers of your own company, you kind of see, because you can buy your way to the top, but then if the tumbler you bought leaked and everybody knew it leaked when you bought it, you're like, well, wait a sec. The consumer's getting fooled. You as marketers of your company trying to sell your product or trying to figure out, how to make that work. But, it's the guessing game. And again, when you're trying to sell a product, it's one thing. When you're trying to be a purveyor of the truth of what's happening around our city, our state, our country, or our globe with news and information, but you don't know if it's paid or if it's free, it becomes a scary, you understand why the world we're living in has a lot of tension in it, and the technology's contributing to that.
Yeah, and we're talking about search engines, but social media too, right? One negative response from somebody about your company or your product can have such a gigantic impact, whether it's accurate or not.
Yeah, and the social media is a similar challenge, but it's a different part of the arena, is the way we think of it. But I think all of us know, and we were having a great talk with some of the TCU colleagues before, and someone said, oh, well, how much are your kids using social media? And was explaining that Jennifer Garner told her young children, hey, when you find the research that tells you social media is good for your emotional health, then I'll let you get on it. These poor kids, I think, are still searching for it. My daughter who's here is saying, thank God my dad didn't do that. But there's a piece of the social media which what we all know is it is so smart on our consumption patterns online. Now that especially we've got Alexas in our home and things, it's listening to us. I mean, whether it's listening to us, whether it's what we search, whether it's what we type, whether it's they knew that I was at the TCU football game 2 weeks ago and they wanted to then sell me something, to go alongside that. There's a piece of social, though, that's about, it's creating echo chambers. And the echo chambers of society is what worries me from a media business the most, because when someone used to spend those 29 minutes, as I said, flipping the pages of the newspaper, and it's a generation. I'll give you all a sense. A median age of a print reader for us is 64. The median age of a digital subscriber for us is 44. Okay, so you've got a 60, but the 64, turn those pages and you get a great breadth of knowledge. As I said, you're spending 29 minutes and you're saying, okay, maybe I agree with that I just read, maybe I don't, but okay, I at least understand that was their side of the argument of why this is happening in city government. And okay, at least I understand. Well, the problem now in social media is we're in these echo chambers. We don't know we're in the echo chamber as a user. And so we keep being fed that one perspective. Well, when you're only fed one perspective, you get more deeply entrenched in that perspective because you're being reinforced as opposed to getting both sides of the argument. And so to me, the social media piece is a challenge because people oftentimes come and be like, oh, see, what you're writing is, it's fake news, it's all of this. And I was like, okay, but hang on. What's your source of why you felt that way? And they're like, oh, well, because I read X and I only read X. And I'm like, okay. I mean, but I think that's what's difficult is we've got a generation that we've lost of people who, whether they knew it or not, the more pages you flipped and the more you got more perspectives of news stories, all of a sudden our brains and our minds were open, and the social media world has closed our minds.
That's interesting. I'm an old school person who likes to flip.
I am too.
And I get the email in the morning that shows me what the front page of the Dallas Morning News is. And I'm like, that's interesting. And I'll look at that later when I have the real paper in front of me. So with so many ways for people to receive information combined with partisan politics, you've touched on this a little bit, public trust of news organizations continues to decline. So what are you currently doing at Dallas Morning News or Dallas News Corporation through marketing and other decision making to build your trust with your customers?
Yeah, I mean, trust is interesting. We talk about this. Think about your personal lives. If you don't trust your spouse, your coworkers, if you don't have trust as your starting point, I don't know what you have. I don't know how to build from anything. If trust is not your foundation, it's very difficult to establish anything. I mean, think about this in your own home or in your own workplace. Well, now think about what I do for a living. You come to work every day and there's many people in the world saying, well, it's fake. It's the enemy of the people. It's and you're just like, so you're starting from a vantage point where you feel like you're playing defense, but it's okay because we're not blind to the world that we're operating in. We have to understand, okay, if you don't understand where the consumer is coming from, well, then people just think you're just disconnected. So what are we doing, to your question? One, so my executive editor, Catrice Hardy, who is just fantastic. This woman is she's a force. She decided that she wanted to have send out an email every week to our subscribers, and now we've just decided we need to open this up to our non-subscribers to say, here are the news stories we covered this week. Here's why we chose to cover them. Here's why they're important to North Texas. And it's almost like, remember the director's cut of the DVDs? I mean, but it's like if you heard the director say, this is why I made the movie, and this is why we shot the scene this way. I don't know about you all, but I liked that movie so much more when I understood the why. And so she's just said, look, and whether people agree or disagree. And again, what's interesting is since she started sending out this email, I think she has, I think she's up to around 400,000 people that are getting this email of saying, here's what we did and why. What we found is about 85% of people are like, hey, thank you. Because if I didn't understand what your motives were or why it was important or why you chose to make that a front page story as opposed to burying something, or you kind of played that on the homepage for longer than others. So I feel like I'm like, wow, you're going there, because she's getting almost more vulnerable over time. But what we're finding is people are really, really appreciating that. The second thing that we're doing is we're also, as I said, you've got the news side of a newspaper business, and then you have opinion. And we chose a topic about 18 months ago now to said, what series could we start in the opinion pages to reduce the tension and the temperature in politics? And so we have a series called The American Middle. And we just said, look, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, what is the population, what does the populace believe we should do with gun control? What does the populace believe is a valid solution of abortion and abortion rights? I mean, these are tense topics, right? But we said, okay, but let's start with the data. And what we realized is about 2/3 of our country, so you all 2/3 of this room, is saying, I think there's probably something in this American middle where we could settle and say, I think this would make our country a little bit better. The problem is, go back to social media, the 10% on the left and the 10% on the right are getting so much of the attention on social media that we felt like the American middle was being lost. And that's one where you say, how do you establish trust? Is to say, okay, can we bring the temperature down a little bit, and could we make people smarter rather than just getting their passions, elevated, and maybe even if the majority of the population doesn't believe in it, then why is it getting so much attention? And we said maybe we should get attention to actually moving our country forward. So
That's a really interesting approach, and I hope y'all keep doing that.
We're going to do it 3 years. We just said we're not going to stop. We know all the way through next year's election cycle it's going to be more necessary than maybe ever.
It's interesting. We often feel like things are so polarized, and there is so much more in the middle that if we just talk to each other and listen, there's so much more opportunity for solution.
You think about the cocktail parties, right? Think about the dinner parties that everyone in here is going to. When you talk to people, they're like, actually, I think we kind of see, it's a little bit of a gradation from the middle. It's not, you're like, oh, well, is the world really like that then? Or is that just kind of the version of politics that we're seeing, be promoted?
Yeah, that's interesting. You have unique challenges as a leader of a major news organization, major news media organization, but much of what you have shared today can be applied to businesses across various industries. So I said you are a man of many hats, putting on your CEO hat. What's your secret to balancing the many moving parts that make up your business?
Just focus on your consumer. To me, we have found ourselves having the biggest challenges when we do what I call four-corner decisions. Four-corner decisions means we looked around all four corners of this room, and then we as a team made a decision. When the customer's not in the room, the customer, and so we have been, my team gets exhausted by it because, one of our core values is customer focus. But it's interesting, it's an old habit that dies really hard, I was like, okay, go back to the drawing board. I don't see any consumer feedback. I don't see any consumer research in this decision. I don't see, and the interesting part is feedback and the customer feedback could be a couple different things. And I'm guessing this is applicable to many of your businesses, especially in a digital era. We have so much data. The amount of data we have, sometimes you actually we have to go deploy and do some qualitative research and say, okay, why didn't people like that? Or why aren't more people reading our restaurant coverage than are reading our sports coverage? I don't know, whatever a topic may be. But sometimes if you just go study your data, the consumer's telling you without asking them. And we can see, they're spending more time on this type of content than that type of content, but they're not subscribing. They like to peruse, but they won't pay. Well, why? And so to me, that customer data and our team and actually our staff, I became publisher of the Morning News now 5.5 years ago, and we've tripled the size of really our team that's doing what we call business intelligence. But it's really data research, but what is the data telling us? What is the consumer telling us? And if you keep focusing on the consumer, no matter what the disruption is, I think we found we get much closer to success when we do that.
So right, we could also have you back and have a whole separate conversation just on analytics, not just on things like AI. Okay, so I'm going to open it up now for some questions from our audience. So first one, what do today's news organizations and media professionals need to be doing now to get ahead of the curve?
Wow, it's a broad question, but it's a good question. Let's start with data. I mean, because the data I think is a really interesting one. We went and started working on this to build a data lake and what we call the infrastructure of collecting our data, parsing our data, making sense of our data now 8 years ago. And if you don't have it in a digital age, I mean, you're done. I mean, you cannot make good strategic decisions without data. But I would also tell you, within your own organization, no different than that question on media, is if your data collection is not turning into business intelligence, data analytics and business intelligence are two very different things. And until about, I'd say for our first 4 years, we were a data analytics company. And now I've seen that because we're putting smart people on it. And it just shows you too, you can have all the AI in the world, you can have all the technology in the world, but not only do people need to tell you what the data is saying and teach you, but they also have to show you how to give the consumer what they want. And that's not going to come through the data, it's going to come through great teaching with the business intelligence team. And so I think I would just encourage the media business, if the data, the harvesting of that data, but turning it into business intelligence isn't there, especially in a digital world, you just can't succeed.
That's a fantastic answer. What are 1 or 2 news media consumption habits that you recommend for people to be savvy consumers of news?
You were starting to touch on it earlier, which I think is different. Because you said, when I see the front page, I think that's interesting, but I want to wait until I can find time to thoughtfully read it, spend a little time with it. And so I would give 2 pieces of advice of how you can be a very responsible consumer of news, journalism. One, take some time, especially if it's a complex topic. Again, I'm not going to get into the politics of this Israel-Hamas war, but I think what is fascinating is I'm seeing people get really passionate and really angry and I'm like, but then I'm realizing I think a lot of these people did not spend a lot of time saying, okay, hang on, what is the history of this conflict? How far back does it really go? What was the root of that? Okay, how is that different then of what just happened in these past few weeks? And I think there's a piece where I would encourage all of you, find time, quiet time, to really kind of consume it and pull together your thoughts and say, okay, and is it from a source that when you Google and said, I want to understand the history of Israel and Palestine, or history of the Gaza Strip and the pressure there, find the source, but then spend some time with it. The second thing I would encourage you to do is read different sources. Read both sides of the argument. You know what? If you watch CNN and you know what, that's your jam, go turn on Fox News and say, you know what? Okay, if I don't agree with that, or vice versa. But allow yourself to say, okay, because that way you're challenging your thought, whether it's reading, whether it's viewing. Make sure that the sources, and again, because if you say, I mean, look, all of us have convictions. So you're going to have a source that you trust. And if your source you trust is cable network X, that's fine. But don't forget, cable network Y may help teach you a little bit. And it'll either reinforce what you believe, or it'll say, oh, I actually never looked at it that way. And maybe I should, because that's a pretty valid argument too. And to me, I would say the amount of time you spend and allow yourself to see both sides of those arguments.
Yeah, we spend so much time on our own perspectives, but you're never going to find a solution that's agreeable to both sides, or really understand the other side and be able to persuade them if you don't really know what perspective they're coming from. And it's so easy to vilify the other side, but right, everybody, their perspective makes sense to them for some reason. Okay, what are the top drivers of traffic to your digital products? And they give me a whole bunch of bullet points here too. So they're particularly interested in sports, opinion, local news, and national news.
Oh yeah, okay, so yeah, by what we call by content area. Top source of well, let's have some fun with you all on this one. I'm gonna give you 3 options. 1 is news, 2 is sports, and 3 is, I'll just call arts and entertainment. How many people in here think that news is the biggest source of audience for our website? Okay, bold pick, Ed. Okay. How many?
That's Ed
what
for
percentage
ya.
do you think sports is the biggest percentage? Okay, and then how many people think arts and entertainment? Okay, so that is fascinating. It's why they know. Sports is the #1 driver of traffic to DallasNews.com. The Dallas Cowboys are a machine in terms of the amount of page views that they produce. And it's fascinating. I mean, like, who isn't loving this Rangers run? My family thinks I'm an addict on it, which I am these days. But what's fascinating, think about the Cowboys and the Rangers. Even with this Rangers run night right now, and I had the team pull this last week because I was like, are the Cowboys really that dominant in a bye week? Our Cowboys traffic versus our Rangers traffic was 12-1.
Huh.
And I was like, you're in the playoffs, you're trying to get to the World Series, and the Cowboys are in a bye week, right? You're just like, how in the world is that? But I'll tell you too, arts and entertainment, our restaurant coverage. So an average story for us will get about 2,100 page views per story. Average restaurant story for us gets about 5,800 page views per story. And so it's just interesting. I mean, as we all know, but that's also what's great about local news. Oh, why'd that restaurant close? Or what's that new hot? You want to know what's the new hot restaurant, and could I get in maybe a little bit sooner on getting that reservation before everyone is there? I saw Greg, Rudy, one of my MBA classmates, talking about why are restaurants so finicky, or why is that consumer behavior, especially in Dallas? Good Lord, that restaurant's so hot, and then it's closed 3 months later, and you're like, what happened? But yeah.
Okay, for more current AI platforms, how are you mitigating emergency challenges of new AI write legibly, folks. How are you mitigating emerging challenges of new AI platforms?
It is so hard. That is such a smart question. Your 2 big ones that are dominant right now are ChatGPT and, as I mentioned, Google's Bard. I mean, the 2 of them have, and you can't even see the market share because it's not really clear to us. We can't see, speaking of data, I can't see that data clearly enough because they're not coming through to our site. So if they're not coming through to us, then you're trying to figure out who's crawling your content. Some of these new ones are actually crawling us on someone else's access, so we don't know who they are. I spend a lot of time in Washington, D.C. these days trying to talk to our political leaders to just explain we can't see it, and it's our intellectual property, and it's you all trying to trust and depend on the news that you read, and can I trust it? And if I don't know these new ones, I don't know the names, I don't know how they're getting to us. I've got 2 people just spending time building blockers all the time. But if they're coming in through an access point, that is generating a lot of revenue for us, but we don't know if someone's piggybacking on it. It is,
Yeah.
I'll tell you, this is it's a scary new thing because there's a lack of transparency.
Yeah.
When you can't see it, when you can't see what's potentially hurting your business or hurting news and information, it's scary.
That is an unenviable challenge, and it's one that I'm guessing a lot of people are experiencing, especially when your business is built around intellectual property. Okay, this last question from the audience is a good one. They were all good, but I think this is a good one for our last question from the audience. Can a news organization work on an ad-supported basis only without subscriptions? And they go on to say, I won't read a news story online unless it's free to me.
Oh, you're killing me. Oh, look, I get it. I get it. I get it. I get it. We have 7 million people coming to us every month and only 70,000 subscribe. I'm like, why will more people not subscribe? But I get it. I mean, 99% of people feel that way. Is it sustainable? No. You can't have, in my opinion, well, let me rephrase that. Talked to a gentleman from the Fort Worth report before. let me put it this way. If I'm in a nonprofit organization like the Fort Worth report, which I think, by the way, is just doing an outstanding job with their journalism. Now they're getting it from donations, right? So or the Texas Tribune, which some of you may be familiar with. So it doesn't necessarily, something else has to subsidize the advertising, is my point. Right now, we call it subscriptions. That's the majority of the industry, thinks of it as subscriptions. But to, even give you a sense, the New York Times has 10 million digital subscribers, but only 32% of them are subscribing to news. Mm-hmm. So they've had to diversify their portfolio. They bought Wordle. They bought The Athletic. They had to buy all these other things to get to 10 million digital subscribers. But what that shows me is the New York Times is the most successful example of the subscription business, but they've really had to diversify because they also know there's only so many people that are willing to pay for news as a subscriber. And I get it. You've got your television stations, some of your radio stations for free, and your philanthropic groups, but they want that support. As well.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Okay, so we are technically at the end, but I always like to end with, this has been a great conversation, and so as people walk out today, what are the 3 takeaways you would like them to leave with?
I'll make it quick for you. One, as I said, when your business gets disintermediated, figure out how, like I said, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, getting between you and your customer, figure out how do you reestablish a direct relationship. Number 2 is I'll go back to trust. If you don't have trust with your customer and you're not doing everything you can to establish trust, I don't know where you go from there. And the third one, I'd really like to appeal to you all more as just consumers of news rather than maybe a business tip, but it's scrutinize your sources. Please scrutinize the sources of news and information that is allowing you to fill your minds and your hearts and your passion, because we need a healthier society, and I think it comes with you all being a great, somebody who's scrutinizing the sources that are feeding your mind.
Those were great takeaways. Thank you so much, Grant.
Absolutely.
It's been such
Thank
a wonderful
you.
conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It was
appreciate
great.
it.
Yeah, and thank you to all of you. And I hope this has been a great start to your week.